Hey all, Alex here at your home of the Music Deep Dive, and today it is time for a review of the 2022 book by Emily Bingham, My Old Kentucky Home, The Astonishing Life and Reckoning of an Iconic American Song. Emily Bingham, unsurprisingly, a Kentucky native born in Louisville, got her degree from Harvard University and got her PhD from the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. But what's interesting about Bingham and her work is kind of her background. The first interesting thing, I suppose. Bingham actually comes from a sort of media dynasty, if you will, from the Louisville area. Her great-grandfather was Robert Bingham, who was a North Carolina-born lawyer who moved to Louisville, came into a decent chunk of money due to a marriage and subsequent passing of his second wife in the late 1910s under kind of suspicious circumstances. Some people speculate that he may have offed her. It's hard to tell. But in any case, he inherited a decent amount of money. He bought the Courier-Journal and the Louisville Times, which were kind of the pairing of most prominent Louisville newspapers at that time. And in doing so, the Bingham family ended up acquiring a sort of total control over the news and journalism that was being spread in the Louisville area, one that they held through several generations afterwards, up until kind of the latter part of the 20th century. Robert Bingham, incidentally, would go on to become the U.S. ambassador to the United Kingdom up until he contracted cancer, and at that point was replaced by a Massachusetts-born fellow named Joseph Kennedy, whose son you may have heard of, several of his sons, in fact. In any case, Emily comes, several generations down. Again, Robert was her great-grandfather, and she has a journalism background in of her self, and has written a number of pieces over the years, and has written a couple of books, including one on her great aunt, Henrietta. And her entire focus seems to be on this idea of Southern culture and how it ties into more kind of contemporary social ideas, these ideas of sexuality. So, for instance, her great aunt Henrietta was a lesbian, and that is something that book, at least from my understanding, has to tackle pretty head on, because that's an essential part of her character. And in a general sense, I think Emily's work seems to be focused on kind of this general idea of Southern culture, and specifically, I think her own area of expertise, that being Louisville and that being Kentucky. And so it's unsurprising then that Emily is the one who is really trying to grapple with My Old Kentucky Home. Of course, one of the most famous songs written by Stephen Foster, whose work I also talked about in my review of the book Doodah by Ken Emerson. And this book is not a Foster biography. I mean, it says in the title, this is about a song. This is dissecting the song My Old Kentucky Home, not from a musicological standpoint, but from a culturally analytical standpoint. My Old Kentucky Home is a song, as with many of Foster's songs, that has roots in racism, and very ardent racism. The original lyrics have these famous references to, quote unquote, darkies or whatever, very offensive terminology. And that is a history that in many ways, as Bingham describes here, has been whitewashed over history. And it really, the whole point of the book is this kind of discussion of how we went from the song being one of the most popular songs in the United States of America to a song that was still incredibly popular, but the lyrics were becoming more and more sanitized for professional performances. You even had famous blackface singers like Al Jolson, for instance, famous minstrel or minstrel-adjacent performers censoring lyrics, to where we have been at really for the last few decades, which is a society that acknowledges the I suppose, awful example that the earlier lyrics set and doesn't really acknowledge the earlier lyrics, but can't really rid itself of the song. And Emily herself seems to be of the mind that you can't shake off the history, you can't erase it. And now there's this kind of battle where the song has become this sort of integral part of Kentucky and arguably of the South. But is it a song that should hold that sort of standing? Is it a song that is really acceptable to be performing given the history, given the fact that it is of the minstrel tradition and is one of those kind of last vestiges of that sort of style that we continue to hold up and that we continue to perform on a regular basis, right? And so that's the question that Emily is trying to grapple with here. And it's a really fascinating question. And for the most part, I think this book is done excellently as far as how she kind of makes her case for it, how she talks about the kind of history of the song and different attempts to not censor the song, but in any ways trying to censor those who were opposed to it. And that kind of back and forth then has gone on, and you watch the song kind of get peeled apart over time until we're left with the very sort of sanitized version that we have in our popular understanding today. And what I really appreciate is how Emily frames this, because she frames it in the context of her family's own story and her family's own kind of complicated legacy. This was not a group of bleeding heart liberals, at least not in the earlier generations. These were people who, perpetuated racism and perpetuated the type of culture that Emily is arguing we should be striving to move away from. And I think that framework is interesting. I will say, and this is probably one of the bigger problems that I have with this book, there aren't a whole lot of them, but maybe the biggest problem I had was that there are times when there's a little bit too much, for my taste, of like head on, like really obvious, like white guilt happening. And what I mean by that, and I don't mean it in the sense of like you can't feel guilt for what actions your family has perpetrated over the years. I think quite the opposite. I think feeling that sort of remorse is healthy. I think it's more in how it is expressed. I think this is the type of narrative where you are constructing facts. You're constructing facts about the song and about the culture and about your family. If you're trying to center them in the narrative, you are saying these facts about what happened and what they did, etc., etc. From my standpoint, I feel like you can let those facts kind of sit there and speak for themselves and give them that space, because I feel like is where the impact is. And I don't know that happens as much as I would like it to. I feel like there is quite a bit of Emily explaining why, of like the author explaining why thing X or thing Y is bad and how we shouldn't be performing the song. And that's kind of the conclusion that comes at the end. And okay, fair. I feel like we didn't need to verbalize that, though. I feel like the facts and the way that she's laying them out are a compelling enough case on their own. And that might be nitpicking, and I understand that. And I understand that people also sometimes just need these things spelled out pretty explicitly. So I don't want that to be as negative of a criticism as maybe it's coming across. I just felt like it wasn't necessary. And I think because of that, the book and the narrative and the argument all don't breathe as well as they could. But otherwise, I think it is extremely well done. And I also appreciate that Bingham acknowledges the Ken Emerson book, acknowledges that book Doodah on several occasions. And in all of these cases, sort of contrasts her findings with that book's. And in sometimes, I think is deferential to what Emerson was saying or the research that Emerson has done. But in other cases, I think challenges him and challenges some of the ideas in that book. Got to remember that book is 25, almost 30 years older than the book Bingham is writing here. And there's a lot of social and cultural perceptions that have changed since then. and a lot that maybe Emerson was more willing to let slide, more willing to give the benefit of the doubt on, that Bingham is not so willing to. And I think that is a fair contrast. And I think because of that, I really recommend this book, especially as a supplement, as a counterbalance to what Emerson is writing. Again, it's not a full-length biography. It is a deep dive into a particular song, but I think that is also important to understand the influence of Stephen Foster and how it is perpetuated over the years. It's not good enough to look at his life and exclusively that and acknowledging that. I think you have to look at what came afterwards, and it's really difficult to do that with a lot of songs, so focusing on one, like Bingham has done here, I think is perfect. So it's a very good book. I would recommend it. And again, I think it is maybe best served, utilized as a supplement to maybe a more traditional Foster biography like the Emerson one. So if you pack those two together, like I was fortunately able to, you have a lot to chew on and a lot of great discussion material and a lot of great stuff to kind of think about as far as, again, the rather sordid origins of American popular music and kind of how far we have come from that, and yet at the same time, as Bingham proves here, how far we still have to go. With that, I want to thank you so much for watching this video. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. As always, more reviews are to come. Hit that bell for notifications and tell a friend as well. Thanks so much, and I will see you next time right here at your home of the Music Deep Dive.